The scent of lilies and money hung heavy in the air, a potent combination that made Dr. Imani Reed's stomach clench. She sat in the third row, a carefully chosen spot that offered a good view of the elaborate arbor and the impeccably manicured gardens of the Westbrook estate in Connecticut. Around her, a sea of silk, linen, and designer labels shimmered in the bright June afternoon. Imani, in her simple but elegant sapphire dress, felt like a single, dark pebble dropped into a jewel box. Each laugh, each murmured conversation seemed to underscore how utterly out of place she was. This was a world of inherited wealth and effortless grace. A world she only ever saw on glossy magazine pages. A world that subtly, silently, reminded her of every rung on the ladder she hadn't climbed. But then, a different image bloomed in her mind, pushing back the self-consciousness. Zuri. Her daughter, a junior bridesmaid, was likely primping inside the grand house, her dark skin glowing against the pale silk of her dress. Imani's heart swelled with a familiar, fierce pride. Zuri, with her quiet strength and sharp mind, was a testament to Imani's own resilience. They had faced hardships, navigated choppy waters, and come out stronger. Zuri was the reason Imani worked so hard, the reason she sometimes pushed herself into uncomfortable situations like this. Her daughter was her anchor, her joy, her fierce, unwavering purpose. A deep, confident voice cut through her thoughts. "Is this seat taken?" Imani looked up, startled. Standing over her was a man who seemed to have stepped straight off a magazine cover, tall, broad-shouldered, with a meticulously tailored suit that spoke of old money and impeccable taste. His eyes, a striking shade of hazel, held a glint of amusement, as if he knew the answer already but was playing a game. A jolt, sharp and unexpected, ran through Imani. Her breath caught somewhere in her throat, a nervous anticipation she hadn't felt in years. "No," Imani managed, her voice a little breathy. "It's not." He settled beside her with an easy grace that belied his powerful frame. "Silas Thorne," he offered, extending a hand. His grip was firm, warm. "And you are?" Imani repeated her name, waiting for the flicker of recognition that often accompanied her surname in her professional world. It didn't come. But then, his name clicked. Silas Thorne, CEO of Thorne Innovations, the tech titan whose face graced financial reports and society pages. Oh, Imani felt a flush creep up her neck. She was definitely out of her depth. "Reed," Silas mused, his gaze thoughtful. "Imani Reed, are you Zuri's mother?" The question caught her off guard. Imani blinked, a fresh wave of surprise washing over her. "Yes," she said, a new note of suspicion entering her voice. "How do you know Zuri?" Silas offered a charming, almost apologetic smile. "Jennifer, the bride, showed me photos. Spoke highly of her, said she was a remarkably bright young woman." The explanation was plausible, yet a tiny, persistent knot of unease began to form in Imani's stomach. It felt too coincidental. Before Imani could probe further, a perfectly coiffed blonde woman with eyes like chips of ice approached. "Silas, darling, there you are! I've been looking for you!" Her voice, though sweet, held an edge of possessiveness. Genevieve Thorne. Imani recognized her as one of the bride's more formidable aunts, a socialite known for her sharp tongue and even sharper judgments. Genevieve's gaze swept over Imani, a thinly veiled, classist curiosity that made Imani's skin prickle. It was a silent assessment, a question of pedigree and belonging. Silas, with a barely perceptible sigh, acknowledged his aunt. Silas leaned closer to Imani, his voice dropping to a low, urgent whisper that sent a shiver down her spine. "I know this is incredibly abrupt, and I apologize, but would you be willing to pretend we're a couple for the duration of the wedding?" Imani froze, her eyes wide with disbelief. Was he serious? The CEO of Thorne Innovations, a man who could have any woman he wanted, was asking her to center dispone to be his fake date? A flicker of unexpected illicit excitement warred with her confusion. It was absurd, but also strangely thrilling. Imani stared at him, unable to form words. "Are you out of your mind?" she finally managed, her whisper just as fierce as his. Silas offered a wry, almost boyish grin. "Possibly, but my family, particularly my Aunt Genevieve, is relentless. Since my divorce, they've made it their mission to matchmake me with every eligible, and sometimes ineligible, woman in their social circle. I simply need a human shield." He gestured subtly with his chin towards Genevieve, who was now engaged in conversation a few feet away, but still casting pointed glances their way. Imani couldn't help a small, amused huff. The man was exasperated, and she, surprisingly, understood. "A human shield, huh?" Imani murmured, a faint smile playing on her lips. The absurdity of the situation was starting to appeal to her pragmatic side. And what, precisely, is in it for the human shield? Silas's grin widened, a flash of genuine charm. "My eternal gratitude. And I promise to make it worth your while. Besides," he added, his voice dropping conspiratorially, "they're already watching us. It's too late to back out now without inviting even more scrutiny." Imani felt a familiar surge of defiance. She wouldn't be seen as pitiable or alone. As if on cue, the string quartet swelled, signaling the imminent start of the ceremony. Silas reached for Imani's hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. The contact was surprising, a jolt of warmth, and a strange sense of belonging. "Just a few hours," he whispered, his thumb gently caressing the back of her hand. Her breath hitched. The touch was meant to be performative, she knew, a gesture for their watchful audience. Yet a spark, undeniable and unsettling, ignited between them. Imani's heart pounded a rhythm against her ribs. Imani's mind raced. Part of her wanted to snatch her hand away, to declare this whole charade ridiculous. But another, quieter voice whispered, "Why? Why endure the subtle, pitying glances, the whispers about the single mother who only ever brought her daughter to lavish events? It wouldn't be terrible," the voice reasoned, "to avoid being the pitiable single mother sitting alone, to have a powerful, charming man by her side, even if it was just for show. It was a momentary reprieve from the weight of expectations and the sting of unspoken judgments." "Fine," Imani whispered back, her voice barely audible but laced with a newfound resolve. She squeezed his hand, a silent warning. "But you owe me a full explanation, real one, after the ceremony." Silas's grateful smile was immediate and genuine, sending an unexpected flutter through her chest. He nodded, a silent promise. "Absolutely. Every detail." The words hung in the air, a fragile agreement forged amidst the blossoming flowers and hushed anticipation of a wedding. Imani suddenly felt a strange mix of apprehension and exhilaration. The wedding march began, and the bridal party started their procession down the aisle. Imani's eyes immediately found Zuri, gracefully walking as a junior bridesmaid, her gaze scanning the crowd. When Zuri's eyes landed on her mother, seated next to Silas, her hand firmly clasped in his, her eyebrows rose almost imperceptibly. A small, curious smile played on Zuri's lips, a knowing look that made Imani's cheeks flush. Her daughter was perceptive, and Imani knew this would require a very careful explanation later. Then, the bride appeared, a vision in white lace, radiating happiness. All eyes turned to her, and Imani felt a momentary reprieve from the scrutiny. Silas leaned closer, his voice a quiet murmur against her ear. "Your daughter is lovely, Imani. She looks just like you. Same eyes." The unexpected compliment, delivered with such genuine warmth, caught Imani off guard. It was a small observation, but it felt deeply personal, a moment of connection that transcended their fabricated arrangement. Imani's heart gave another surprising lurch. The ceremony unfolded beautifully. A tableau of love and promise under the clear blue sky. Imani tried to focus on the vows, on the joyous occasion, but her awareness of Silas beside her was a constant hum. His hand remained wrapped around hers, a presence that was both grounding and subtly electrifying. The false intimacy of their joined hands, the occasional brush of his arm against hers, created a strange, surreal comfort. This was an act, she reminded herself, a necessary charade. Yet a part of her wondered if the lines were already beginning to blur. During the exchange of rings, Silas stiffened almost imperceptibly beside her. Imani followed his gaze, her eyes landing on a couple seated a few rows ahead. Senator Silas Thorne, Silas's uncle, a man whose face was often in the news, sat beside Genevieve. Both were looking directly at Silas and Imani, their expressions not of simple curiosity, but of calculating, almost predatory interest. Genevieve's lips were curved in a thin, assessing smile, and Alistair's eyes held a glint of something cold and appraising. It was more than social scrutiny. It felt like a silent judgment, a warning. Silas leaned in, his voice low and conspiratorial. "That's my Aunt Genevieve," he confirmed, sensing Imani's gaze. "And her husband, Senator Silas Thorne." He let out a soft, exasperated sigh. "She's already reporting back to the family gossip network, I'm sure. Their favorite pastime is orchestrating my love life, or lack thereof." Imani nodded, a growing sense of complicity settling over her. This wasn't just about a harmless pretense. It was about navigating the intricate, potentially treacherous currents of a powerful family's expectations. "So, was I on the seating chart as your +1, or did you just pull me out of a hat?" Imani asked, a hint of cynicism in her voice. Silas chuckled softly. "The latter, I'm afraid. I was supposed to bring a colleague, but she had a last-minute family emergency." He offered a charming shrug. "It was quite convenient, actually. Saved me the trouble of trying to find a plausible excuse for showing up alone." Imani raised an eyebrow, a small smile playing on her lips. The man was resourceful, she had to admit. As the newlyweds made their joyful exit, the guests began to stir. Before Silas and Imani could even move, Senator Silas Thorne, a man whose imposing presence commanded attention, approached them. His smile was broad, practiced, but his eyes, a piercing blue, were alight with the same calculating interest Imani had noticed earlier. He swept a gaze over Imani, a thorough, assessing look that made her feel acutely exposed. A knot of apprehension tightened in her stomach. This wasn't just a friendly greeting. It was an inspection. "Silas, my boy," Senator Alistair boomed, his voice resonating with power. "And who is this lovely lady you've been hiding?" Silas rose smoothly, pulling Imani up with him, his hand still firmly clasped in hers. "Uncle Alistair, this is Dr. Imani Reed. Imani, my uncle, Senator Alistair Thorne." The introductions were formal, polite, but Imani could feel the underlying tension. Silas gave her hand a subtle squeeze, a silent reminder of their charade. Senator Alistair's smile lingered on Imani, a polite mask that hid a deeper, unsettling curiosity. Senator Alistair Thorne, a man whose smile seemed permanently affixed by a surgeon's skill, repeated her name, Reed. The sound, clipped and precise, hung in the air, stirring an odd memory in Imani's mind, a faint echo from a distant life. But before she could place it, his gaze, sharp as a surgeon's scalpel, met hers. "Are you, by any chance," he began, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that felt anything but related to a David Reed? The name hit Dr. Imani Reed with the force of a physical blow. The festive sounds of the departing wedding party, the gentle rustle of leaves, the distant murmur of conversation, all of it blurred into a disoriented hum. Her breath hitched. David, the man who had been her husband, Zuri's father, the phantom who had vanished from their lives 7 years ago. Her face, she knew, drained of all color. How could this powerful, wealthy senator, a man from a world so far removed from her own, know David? The question screamed in her mind, silencing all other thought. A cold dread, sharp and sudden, pierced through the shock. This wasn't a coincidence. Not here. Not now. Senator Alistair's eyes, she noticed, held a glint of what looked disturbingly like smug satisfaction. Silas's hand, which had been a gentle anchor, tightened around hers, a silent acknowledgement of the shock that had just ripped through her. Imani tried to regain her composure, her mind racing. David. After all these years, his name, uttered by a stranger at a lavish wedding, still held the power to wound. She forced a strained smile, her voice carefully modulated, betraying none of the turmoil inside. "Yes," she managed, the word feeling thick on her tongue. "David is my ex-husband, and Zuri's father." The admission felt raw, exposing a vulnerability she had long since buried, a wound that, despite the years, still throbbed with the dull ache of abandonment. A beat of silence stretched, taut and heavy. Imani's gaze flickered between Silas and Senator Alistair. An unreadable look, swift and significant, passed between uncle and nephew. It was a silent conversation, a flicker of understanding that left Imani completely on the outside, a spectator to a secret she was clearly not privy to. Silas's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. His eyes narrowed, while Senator Alistair's expression remained impassive, a mask of polite interest that did little to hide the calculating glint in his gaze. She had no context, no key to unlock the meaning behind their shared glance, but she knew, with a chilling certainty, that it was important. Senator Alistair finally broke the silence, a practiced chuckle escaping his lips. "Ah, small world, isn't it?" He beamed, a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Well, Dr. Reed, I must say I'm quite eager to get to know you better at the reception." His words were cordial, but the undertone was a warning, a promise of further scrutiny. He then turned his gaze to Silas, a meaningful, almost possessive glance passing between them, before he gave a curt nod and smoothly departed, melting back into the stream of guests heading towards the ballroom. Imani felt a shiver trace her spine. The senator wasn't just curious, he was interested, and that interest felt less like a social overture and more like a predatory assessment. The moment Senator Alistair was out of earshot, the polite facade Imani had painstakingly erected shattered. She whirled on Silas, her eyes blazing, the initial shock now replaced by a surge of anger and a blooming suspicion. His hand was still clasped firmly around hers, but it felt less like comfort and more like a tether. "How does your uncle know David?" she demanded, her voice a low, furious whisper, barely controlled. "And don't even try to tell me you didn't know who I was, Silas Thorne. You knew. You knew my last name, you knew about Zuri. This chance encounter was no coincidence, was it?" The realization hit her with sickening clarity. She had been manipulated, drawn into a web of deceit from the very beginning. Her mind raced, connecting the dots of his too smooth introduction, his quick knowledge of Zuri. He hadn't just been looking for a human shield, he had been looking for her. Silas's playful ease, the charming mask he wore so effortlessly, evaporated. His expression shifted, hardening into something guarded and unyielding. He met her furious gaze without flinching, a silent acknowledgement of her accusation. "You're right," he conceded quietly, his voice devoid of its earlier warmth. "It wasn't a coincidence. And I owe you an explanation, Imani. A full one." He paused, his eyes flicking towards the last few guests, still lingering in the aisle. Then back to her. "But not here. Not now." The implication was clear. Too many ears, too many eyes. He was delaying, controlling the flow of information. And Imani felt a fresh wave of frustration wash over her. "Let go of my hand," Imani commanded, her voice tight with a mixture of anger and the growing realization of just how thoroughly she'd been played. She tugged, a desperate, futile struggle against his grip. He didn't deny her accusation, nor did he loosen his hold. Instead, his fingers tightened, a physical manifestation of her trapped situation. He was physically, unyieldingly keeping her exactly where he wanted her, still playing the part of her attentive date. The power imbalance was stark, infuriating. She was caught, undeniably, in whatever elaborate scheme he had concocted, and the thought made her stomach churn. Silas, his gaze still holding hers, subtly shifted his head. "Zuri's watching," he murmured, his voice low, just for her. Imani's head snapped up. There, at the far end of the aisle, patiently waiting for the bridal party to fully disperse, was Zuri. Her daughter's gaze was fixed on them, a small, curious frown furrowing her brow as she observed her mother and the handsome man still holding her hand. Imani's protective instincts flared, overriding her personal anger. Zuri didn't need to see her mother in a furious, public confrontation. Seeing her attention shift to Zuri, Silas pressed his advantage. "We'll talk at the reception," he promised, his voice earnest, if still guarded. "I'll explain everything. Every last detail. And if, after that, you want me to leave you alone, I will. You won't hear from me again. But please, Imani, let's keep up appearances for a little while longer. For Zuri, if not for me." His words were a calculated gamble, appealing to her maternal instincts and her burgeoning curiosity. Imani stared at him, a whirlwind of